Chapter 43. Franz left Nortier's room in such a state of shock that even Valentine felt pity for him. Villefort muttered a few incoherent words, left hurriedly, and locked himself in his study. 2 hours later, he received the following letter. In view of the facts revealed this morning, Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort cannot believe that an alliance is possible between his family and that of Monsieur Franz d'Épinay. Monsieur d'Épinay is shocked at the thought that Monsieur de Villefort, who appeared to be aware of the events related to this morning, nevertheless made no move to anticipate him in this conclusion. This harsh letter from a young man who until then had been so respectful was a deadly blow to the pride of a man like Villefort. Meanwhile, Valentine, happy and frightened at the same time, kissed and thanked her grandfather, who with a single stroke had shattered a chain which she had regarded as unbreakable. Then she asked his permission to go to her room to calm her nerves, a permission which he granted with his eyes. But instead of going to her room, she went out into the garden. Maximilian was waiting for her at the grill. He had seen Franz and Villefort leave the cemetery together after the funeral of Monsieur and Madame de Saint Méran, and had suspected what was about to take place. He had therefore taken up his post outside the wall, ready for action and convinced that Valentine would come running out to him at the first opportunity. At his first sight of her, he felt reassured. At her first words, his heart leaped with joy. "We're saved," said Valentine. "Saved?" repeated Maximilian, unable to believe in such good fortune. "Who saved us?" "My grandfather. Oh, you must love him, Maximilian." Maximilian swore to love the old man with all his heart. The oath was not difficult for him, because at that moment he did not content himself with loving him as a friend or like a father. He worshipped him like a god. "How did he do it?" asked Maximilian. Valentine opened her mouth to tell him everything, but then she realized that the story involved a terrible secret which did not belong entirely to her grandfather. "I'll tell you about it later," she said. "When?" "When I'm your wife." This gave the conversation a turn which made Maximilian glad to agree to anything. He therefore agreed to content himself with what Valentine had already told him, which was enough for one day. He did, however, demand that she promise to see him the following day, which she was glad to do. Her outlook had changed completely. It was now easier for her to believe that she would marry Maximilian than it had been to believe that she would not marry Franz. The next day, Monsieur Noirtier had the notary called in again. His former will was torn up and a new one made in which he left his entire fortune to Valentine, provided she were not separated from him. A number of people soon calculated that Mademoiselle de Villefort, sole heiress of Monsieur and Madame de Saint Méran, and once again restored to her grandfather's good graces, would some day have an income of nearly 300,000 francs a year. While Valentine's marriage was being broken off, the Count of Morcerf had put on his lieutenant general's uniform, decorated it with all his crosses, asked for his best horses, and set out to pay a visit to Baron Danglars. The banker was engaged in calculating his monthly balance, and for some time past this had not been the best time to find him in a good humor. When his old friend entered, he assumed his most majestic air and sat upright in his chair. On the other hand, Morcerf, who was usually so stiff and formal, was on this occasion smiling and affable. "Well, Baron, here I am," he said. "For some time now we've done nothing to carry out the plans we discussed." "What plans, Count?" asked Danglars, as though vainly seeking to recall what Morcerf was talking about. "Ah, I see you're a formalist and that you want a ceremony according to the rules. Very well, then," said Morcerf, with a forced smile, stood up, bowed deeply to Danglars, and said, "Baron Danglars, I have the honor of requesting the hand of your daughter, Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, for my son, Viscount Albert de Morcerf." But Danglars, instead of receiving these words with the favor Morcerf had expected, frowned and said, "Before giving you an answer, Count, I must have time to reflect." "To reflect!" exclaimed Morcerf, more and more astonished. "Haven't you had time to reflect in the 8 years since we first discussed this marriage?" "Count, every day things happen which make us reconsider matters which we once had believed to be completely settled." "Excuse me, Baron, but I don't understand what you're saying." "I'm saying that a certain few circumstances have arisen recently, and that—" "Those are vague, empty words, Baron," said Morcerf. "They might satisfy an ordinary man, but the Count of Morcerf is not an ordinary man. When someone withdraws a promise made to him, he has a right to demand that he be given a good reason." Although Danglars was a coward, he did not wish to appear to be one. Furthermore, he was irritated by the tone in which Morcerf had just spoken to him. "I have a good reason," he replied, "but it would be difficult to tell it to you. In any case, one thing is clear. You refuse to marry your daughter to my son." "No, I'm only postponing my decision." "But surely you can't have the arrogance to imagine that I'm going to submit to your whims and humbly await a return of your good graces." "If you can't wait, let's consider our plans as cancelled." Morcerf bit his lip to keep back the outburst which his proud and irritable character inclined him to make. Realizing that he was the one who would appear ridiculous in such a scene, he was already on his way out of the room when he changed his mind, turned around, and came back. A cloud had just passed over his face, leaving a trace of vague uneasiness in place of the expression of offended pride that had been there a moment before. "We've known each other many years, Baron," he said, "so we ought to have some consideration for each other. The least you can do is to tell me what unfortunate event has caused my son to lose favor in your eyes." "It doesn't concern your son personally. That's all I can tell you," replied Danglars, becoming insolent again as he saw Morcerf's attitude softening. "And whom does it concern, then?" asked Morcerf uneasily. Danglars looked at him with more self-assurance than he had hitherto shown, and said, "Be grateful to me for not giving you a more detailed explanation.